So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As people are streaming in, we're just gonna take another minute or so until we get this next group of people in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we've arrived at a critical mass and we can go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you all have busy schedules and I appreciate you taking some time out of that schedule for us this Friday afternoon. So thank you. I am Jackie Aldrete, and I'm very honored to be the Managing Director of AFSI USA. And I will be moderating today's event. And I would really excited to introduce you to three of my friends, our esteemed panelists, who will help us to look at some of the questions which are burning within me and maybe also within you over the past year. So before we really get into it, a few housekeeping notes. We are going to record this event. It is going live on YouTube, and therefore it will also be recorded. That's so that others who weren't able to be with us today can watch it at another time. We will use standard Zoom protocol that we're all familiar with. Please keep your microphones off. And we also ask that you might close your camera during the presentations so that you can see more clearly the three panelists and myself. We'll use the chat box to receive questions, and please don't be shy. Feel free to add questions as we go along here. We will have a moderated question and answer session at the end. And at that point, when we have the question and answer, you can certainly turn on your camera and of course your mic when I invite you to make your question. So with that, as long as I don't get any other indication that I need to pause, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So it goes without saying that the COVID pandemic continues to present itself as a shock to our way of life, our society, our health systems, and our economies that is unprecedented in many ways. We can mention the global nature of the crisis, impacting the rich and the poor countries alike, and the multi-sectoral dimension of the shock. It's also unprecedented due to its length and the great uncertainty of when things will really go back to normal. So we feel the urgency of judging this period and grasping those important lessons that reality is trying to teach us. So we don't want to wait until it's over to begin this conversation. Even if the insights and reflections that we share today are initial and emerging, they have great value for us in this process. We know that you too have been living an intense period since this time, just about 1 year from today almost. Some of you may have lost loved ones, been let go from a job, or faced challenges to the business that you run. We have been able to see here in the US, our government intervene to provide support. And we have felt fortunate that in just a matter of days, stimulus checks arrive in our bank accounts. We're comforted to know that the unemployed will receive help, and so on and so forth. But we've also seen the stark reality of inequality, both within countries and across countries. And many of us share the sincere concern about the disproportionate effects of the crisis on those who are already disadvantaged, marginalized, and lacking protections. On February 13th, in the framework of the New York Encounter, AFSI USA sponsored an event at which we heard from three preeminent scholars and policy experts about what they see as the impact of COVID on the global economy and some lessons that are emerging. I'm going to share with you 3 points that we found interesting and useful, and then I'll ask our guests to comment on them and share with us their own experience. So first, they spoke about how the crisis has revealed the extent of globalization and the forces that tie us one to another. We saw the risks of that degree of interconnection, as well as the extent of inequalities. A second point was around the fabric of communities. Communities as places of belonging and interaction among peoples, and those institutions that link people to the market and to political life. We see that they're essential for their role in mitigating the negative impacts of such a shock and enabling people to regain their status and their livelihoods. It was suggested that we need the concept of reciprocity and subsidiarity as pillars of our economic and social life to strengthen community and social links. And the example was made of the role of cooperatives and nonprofit organizations. A third point was simply that while some governments will respond with major financial stimulus packages, this approach in and of itself does not create development. Instead, attention to building back better must address the gaps in access to resources and infrastructure that were laid bare during the crisis. Careful attention to institutions is also important. And one example that came out was that about access to broadband internet as clearly a solution that would help, that helps economies and systems like the education system keep running in the time of the pandemic. So with those thoughts as an introduction, I'm going to now turn to our panelists and ask them to comment on these points and to share with us from their experience some insight into what we are seeing unfold when we look at the world around us, in particular as we focus our gaze on the poor and disadvantaged. First, we'll hear from Laura Fligenti. Laura is currently the global head of the International Development Assistance Services Institute at KPMG. She's also on the board of advisors of AFSI Foundation. And Laura comes from a very long tenure at the World Bank and a few years period in which she was the director for foreign assistance for the government of Italy. So Laura, over to you to share with us your thoughts about these big questions. What impact has COVID had on levels of poverty and inequality? Is this a major setback? What is different about this shock than other shocks? And what lessons are we learning to inform how we build back better? Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me and to allow me to contribute to this important conversation. Though I have to say that we have many venues where we try to discuss about what the impact of COVID has been. And I always like to start saying that I don't think that we have fully quantified many of the dimensions of the impact. And I think about issues related to mental health, the impact that COVID has had on our children that they were deprived of socializing in their school and in other venue with with their friends, etc., etc. So I really think that we are just at the beginning of trying to understand what the impact has been. But clearly, the first indications that we can see is that it's been a pretty traumatic impact. I think that the world, the arc of history was bending in the right direction, to paraphrase, a sentence from President Kennedy. For about 25 years, we had seen significant gains in poverty reduction. We had seen the largest number of people moving from a poor position into the middle class, even if very closely to the poverty line. But I mean, it's still with some great opportunities. And just in this year, there has been a dramatic bouncing back. Part of that has been limited by very massive intervention from different governments with stimulus packages. You were referring to the one from the government of the United States, but I would say that each and every country, within, of course, their limitations and within their social protection type of range of tools, they have really tried, very hard to do something to help households keep their heads above water. But clearly, I mean, the millions of jobs that have been lost, the millions of business that, have been impacted and that, had to shut down, and how this is going to go back to that positive trend that we have seen, it's hard for the moment to think. And as we are all getting a lot of solace, I feel, when we see at the end of every month the positive numbers that are coming of people that are getting back into the labor market, of people that are getting back into productive activities, or that are no more eligible for unemployment benefits, which in itself is a very positive thing. I mean, still we cannot deny that has been a very massive shock in terms of income and income reduction, particularly for households that were particularly poor and vulnerable. And I think that this is one thing that has emerged, that unfortunately the big divide that we had seen in society coming as a result of globalization, of people having good jobs and people having not so good jobs, has become even more acute with COVID, because the people with the good jobs, they were somehow able to keep them. They have been, as many of us, able to continue working from our house with the help of technology. The people who had less technologically advanced, less technologically sophisticated jobs are the big losers in this context. And I think that this is a pretty dramatic situation, particularly as we think about the rebuilding of the economy and of societies, and some of the lessons that employers and big corporations have learned about, the potential of working remote and, introducing elements of efficiency that were unthinkable before. Then this, I am concerned, that is going to penalize even more so the people who are outside of the mainstream of good jobs. So that is one point. We have lost a lot in terms of access to social services. We have seen that, and I just want to mention two examples. The first one, that particularly in countries where there is not a kind of a national health system or universal healthcare accessible to everybody, there has been a dramatic reduction of people in using health services for having things that were different than COVID related. So people didn't go for their cancer screening, didn't go for their annual checkup, didn't go for their blood test, didn't go for all the kind of routine screening that form the backbone of our prevention medicine that actually keeps people in good health. And I think that this is another of the areas where we really don't know what kind of negative impact this is going to have on many, but I bet that it's not going to be insignificant. And the second one is education, where, even if we are all telling ourselves that the children have still been in school and that they have been accessing their teachers, et cetera, through remote learning, the reality is that this remote learning doesn't have, nor the how can I say, the content quality that in-person learning is, but for sure not the social development skills that are so needed. And so there is basically one full year that has been lost, and that, education system in the countries need to start thinking about how they really want to help a generation of children to catch up on this major loss that has been imposed on them. What have we learned? I think that what we have learned is that I think that the main points that were on the Agenda 2030 on the SDGs come very strongly reinforced. If we compare countries that had universal health care in place with countries that didn't have, we have seen that definitely the first group fared much better compared to others. And so my expectation, my hope would be that the moment that the pandemic is behind us, that the countries really do a very deep soul searching about how to make sure that an important package of social services be available to their population, so that when a crisis, when a shock hits, that they will have the infrastructure in place to respond better. The second thing that we have learned is that the governments have really done, and I have to say across the board, governments of different denominations and of different political inspirations, they have all tried to do the best that they could to support their households. But in reality, we have seen again that countries that had a very well-structured system in place of both protection of the workers and of social protection system in place for vulnerable segments of the population have done much better than those countries that had to design and create them at the time of the shock. In the first case, it was just ramping up what they already had. In the other case, it has been, moving into rushed design of social protection systems that, are very expensive and obviously, at times have significant leakages. And I would say that this puts us around what is, in my view, going to be the topic, of probably the next decade, which is, can we think about a different type of social protection that is not just handing out checks and financial support and financial stimulus to individuals or to individual households, because this is very expensive and ultimately, as you said, Jack, it doesn't really generate development. But shouldn't the same resources be invested in upgrading the quality of jobs, making sure that there is a kind of an alliance between governments and employers so that the jobs are created, people are kept in their jobs, and they will manage or may manage to navigate this big transition that is ahead of us in terms of the future of jobs in a different way. So I would say that these are the themes that to me seems to be very important. The reinforcing the sense that social services are very needed and that they need to be provided and they need to be, system of social services need to be in place. And then what is really the role of government on the other hand, to make sure that there are good and equitable access, to good jobs for all the people. And on both things, I feel that organizations like AVSI and the civil society at large have an important role to play, and maybe we can come back to that at a later stage during this conversation.
Thank you, Laura. That was really interesting, and you also teed us up very well to shift. One of the things that you brought to light is how, when we look around the world, there's a big variety of countries and their level of the quality of their systems, the protection systems and social service systems to provide basic services, and then also to respond to these shocks. And we definitely experience that as AFSI, working in countries like Haiti on the one hand, and then in countries like Kenya, Rwanda, and other places, even within those examples, there's a big variety in terms of what the government is providing and therefore what our role is. Okay, so let's then look at AFSI's experience as one example of an NGO kind of working in this space to fill in some of these gaps and to stay close. Our mission is to stay close to the poor and vulnerable. We're going to hear from Giampaolo Silvestri, who is the Secretary General of AFSI Foundation globally. And after Giampaolo, we'll hear from John Makoa, who is the country representative for AFSI in Uganda. Now, I see, Giampaolo, you're eager to speak, but before you do, we did want to share this very short video that we've recently produced, which is just going to give you a little flavor of who we are as an organization and how we see our role, and then we'll jump into some questions for Giampaolo and John. So if you allow me, I'm going to share a video, and here It goes.
At AFSI USA, we believe your circumstances don't define you. We build relationships to address challenges like poverty and disease and unlock a new outlook on life. In Mexico, Socorro empowers families through nutrition and education so kids can reach their full potential.
Queremos que puedan despertar sus deseos para que sean capaces de reconocer que son hechos para el infinito y puedan moverse hacia él.
In Uganda, Rose walks with HIV-positive women, helping them recognize their human dignity and find joy.
Every human being is not defined by the problems, by the sickness, by the poverty, not even richness, but you are greater than what you can imagine.
People are at the heart of what we do. We connect you directly with changemakers like Socorro and Rose. Together, we can build resilience and lasting solutions.
Okay, so with that, I pass it over to you, Gianpaolo. The questions that we ask you to focus on are, how has your work changed? What has been your experience responding to the uncertain and shifting context created by COVID? What is the role of community? And how can civil society organizations support the most vulnerable in our societies to recover after the crisis? And how is AFSI helping local communities to rebuild? Thank you, Gianpaolo.
Thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank AFSI USA for this opportunity to share our experiences and lessons learned during this year. It has been a very strange year for all the world and very challenging for us, for AFSI. But let me be very provocative in order also to move the dialogue, the conversation. COVID pandemic, I think, is not the main issue. It is a big element of the framework in which we work, in which we live. Probably the most important in this period and in the future. It is a new cause, but the strong impact is an impact that, as AFSI, also we learn to take during our history, because during our history we face the poverty, the inequalities, the needs of vulnerable people who wish decent work and life. It is important, this premise for me, as this offers us the opportunity to work with awareness that we have to keep always at the center the person and her dignity, not the pandemic. The pandemic is an element, I repeat, of the context. Very important, probably new. And for this reason, during this period, we didn't stop the activities of the project. We continue to stay closer to our beneficiary. It's clear we had to modify, to change the activities in order to adapt to the new circumstances, but we didn't stop. In order not only to be resilient, but in order also to try to change the cycle, no? To be anti-cycle. This was very important. This is the first lesson we learned from this period. This approach pushes us to study the dimension of the pandemic, to forecast its trend, to understand what can be its cost in terms of lives, economy, health, needs. It's clear, as Laura said, the number of new poor is growing, as a large part of informal economy stopped. It's very, John will say something about this. That means a huge number of people without an income. If we see this trend, forecast its dimension, it becomes clear that we have to support strongly, not only all the means to safeguard the health, but also education, vocational training programs, job creation. The importance of multi-sectoral programs able to support people in finding new ways to get an income. For us, first of all, education challenge remains the starting point. If the children cannot go to school, we have to reach them anyway. Some data about education. UNICEF calls COVID-19 a catastrophe for children in sub-Saharan Africa. The region is suffering its first economic recession, and overall, over half of children are dealing with the food insecurity as a result. The World Bank estimates that in 77% of people in Ethiopia, Malawi, Nigeria, and Uganda are in households that have lost income due to the pandemic. And from 20 to 25% of the households don't have enough food. Before the pandemic, 96% of students had contact with their teachers. Now, only 17%. These data show very well the impact of the pandemic on education, on the children, so on our future. This is the point. For example, one of the projects that we realized during this period was in RDC, was to organize lessons for the students, for the schools, for primary, through the radios. That in that context is the main tool to reach the people also in the remote village, in the forest, no? And it was very successful, this kind of a program. But another project that I want to mention is a project linked to the other main problem that I mentioned before, is about to increase, to try to find a way to get income for the people. Is the SAY project in Uganda, a project which the main objective is to create a job for young people in agriculture. This, at the base of this project, there is a strong strategy of different activities that will help people to become economically independent and promoter of a new green agriculture. This is a project that the beneficiaries are more or less 10,000 young people, and it's very important in a context like Uganda, where agriculture is an asset and where the young population is half of the total population. But another point very important, and it's another lesson we learned during this period, is about the role of the civil society. This time, the role of the community is becoming always more central. I can say also essential. Civil society organizations are confirming their role to support the most vulnerable in our society during the pandemic, and also to recover after the crisis, especially in the developing countries, but also in a country like in Italy, no? Because also during the period we increase our activities for in Italy for the poor people, because also in Italy the situation is different from the previous period. This presence, due to their presence in the field close to the true needs, the civil society organizations are a very important role. And also a lot of politicians, they reaffirm this sentence, this concept. Another point very important is that we continue to promote the capacity building to help the local partners in the developing countries to become more active and more protagonist in facing the main challenges brought on by COVID-19. So it's clear. I know that what I'm saying about that the COVID is not the main issue, but I wanted to say this today, especially because today, as probably you know, the Italian government has decided a new strong lockdown for the next 3 weeks or 1 month, I don't know. And I am aware about the impact of this, especially not only also for my life, no, especially. But I think that the main point remains the person, the awareness of the person, of the people, my dignity, And also starting from this concept, this idea, it's possible also to be resilient, but not only resilient, also to be proactive, to face the different circumstances, the difficult circumstances in which which we live, in which we have to face. Also, in the next 3 weeks for me, for my life, from my colleague here in Italy. This is the point, because if I don't start from this awareness, it's very difficult also to face these next 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianpaolo. Okay, let's turn it over to John, who's going to continue on the same theme, but from the experience in Uganda. Thank you, John. Sorry, I forgot. I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint, John's PowerPoint. Yes. All right, now it should be over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Sorry if my internet is a little bit up and down, but I prepared this PowerPoint just to make sure that in case I keep going off and on, you can still follow me through the PowerPoint. Jackie, if you can move to the next slide. You know, we started hearing about the COVID towards the end of the year 2019, and somewhere around March 2020, the government instituted the lockdown, and a lot of effort was put to prepare us in terms of trying to understand what are precautions we can take, and the government introduced operating procedures and so on. But I think what happened to us was also something unprecedented. So there was no amount of preparedness that was able to prepare us. Initial preparedness was able to put us in front of this situation without a shock. Next slide, Jackie. It's a bit slow. It's sorry, because of my internet. And what happened with this restriction? We had an initial restriction, a lockdown, like the one that Gianpaolo was talking about. That initially was for 14 days, but went on for another 3 months. And how did that affect our activities? It meant that some of our activities, of course, we had to close. For example, activities related to schools were completely closed because all the schools were closed at the time. And then a number of activities happened through groups. And of course, there was an issue of social distancing, and that meant that now group activities were curtailed. We had to rethink on what to do. But there were also practical things like the communities where we work, they don't have so much resources, and that meant that if they had to have masks, we had to find a way of securing these masks for them. And of course, one of the biggest hindrance was also in terms of transport. During the lockdown, all the transport was closed down, and therefore it meant a lot. It meant that people lost their livelihoods because a lot of people live from hand to mouth. It means unless they go out to work, they can't have something to eat, especially in the urban centers, but also in the rural places. If they have to find money, they have to go to some local center to be able to do to sell their stuff or sell some of their commodities. So that restriction had quite an impact on our work, but also on ourselves as APSI staff. We were also locked down. Some of us were locked down within the communities where we worked, with not enough time to be able to move from where we were to probably a place we thought was for safety. So this affected us and also the communities we work with. Jackie, if you can move to the next slide. So what did we do? We decided, of course, the initial shock sent us thinking. So we had to think from the point of fact that we could not stop our activities. So we decided to think of adapting some of the things we do. For example, in the activities where we had to meet in groups of 25, we had to ensure that we reduce those activities to groups of 5, like we have the village and loan saving schemes that we do with the communities. It always has between 25 to 30 people, so we had to limit those. Then immediately it meant that, but all of those 5 people, even if they meet, they need masks. And however, those communities can't afford masks the way other people can afford them. So we had to ensure that we taught them skills of making masks. We also introduced a lot of smart working, meaning that we work from afar. And we depended a lot on the community-based staff who were then, because they already embedded in the communities, were able to support. But again, we had another shift in terms of the use of the tools that we have to use. The telephone became a very important tool for us to use in terms of getting in touch. But also sometimes we decided to collect data using this telephone to try and understand what was the situation. And this, we did not only do it for the communities where we work, we also did it for our own staff. I had Laura mentioning issues of mental health became issues that were important, both for us and also for the people that we work with. And what about schooling? Schooling had stopped completely because the children were left home. But most of our homes are never conducive for learning in terms of either they are small in nature, they are within conditions that are not very conducive for learning. So we started to think on what do we do? We started to say, okay, one, we can support home learning. The government itself had introduced the home learning schedule. However, getting materials to the students was a problem. Getting the students to look at the materials was another problem. But besides that, we also had teachers. The teachers had to continue with their livelihood, and yet that livelihood included for them coming to school to teach. So we had to rethink on how we can be able to use these teachers so that they can continue also to earn a living, besides the fact that they can also continue to support the children to learn while they're at home. So we introduced what we call the home schooling, and the teachers went to the homes, brought some kids together in various homes, and started teaching them from home. If you can move to the next one. Jackie, as you move to the next one, I think we have this internet connection that makes it a bit slow to move. So what happened is that we realized that a lot of what we've done in the past also gave us an edge in trying to help us have a continuation in our work. One of those things was that we focused on education, empowering people, meaning that we teach them so that they can be able to do things for themselves. And we saw that became quite useful in terms of when people are separated and they are alone, they will fall back to some of the things that they will be able to learn, and they can be able to use them. And then we also use the facilitative approach, meaning that we usually train people to train others. And a number of these people we train are usually embedded in those communities. So in other words, we just facilitate them and they are able to do the thing that we have been able to plan with them. And this one enabled them to continue implementing the plans that we had already made with them. Then we work a lot with the community-based structures, meaning that when we go somewhere, we do not duplicate what is there. We try to understand how those communities live, what are the structures that are useful, and we take advantage of those structures. So, for example, we have what we call coaches in some of the places. These are usually people that we train, but they are embedded within the structure. So they're able also to train other people. This helped us a lot in order to keep the things going. We have a lot of our staff that we secure locally, meaning that they are staff of AFSI, but live in those areas. And some of those managed to help us to reach some of the communities where we could not be able to reach even despite the lockdown. Then our work with the local governments helps us a lot. In fact, this one was mainly when we did the work related to health. A lot of our structures closed down because there was no way to reach the central system. But these local government structures managed to put down task forces, which of course were responding to the national task forces, but embedded within the communities. But because we work with them and they know us, this enabled us to be able to be embedded in those structures. And they also asked us to remain there in order to be able to support them, because they knew that we had the capacity to support them because of the previous experience of working with them. But most important, is because we did not leave them alone, despite the difficulty that we personally faced. In fact, we lost one of our staff during this period, and it was a shock to us. It was heartbreaking. But nonetheless, our staff continued to ensure that they reached the communities. And for the communities, that was very, very reassuring. But there are some things that we started to see that made us realize that the way we have worked in the past really enabled these communities to continue the work. For example, the meals they had later, when we did a small survey, the frequency of meals remained almost the same, with a slight reduction. They had income diversification. They started to look for other different ways of earning a living. When we compared that to other communities, we saw that this was a sign that what we do with them became a resource in terms of difficulties. We move to the next one. What did we learn out of this? One, we learned that each time now we work going forward, we always try to adapt and do a contingency planning. We prepare for the uncertainty, because now uncertainty looked like it was something that we should expect to come. We realized that the familiarity with technology, for example, the use of phone and so on, become imperative for us. So we started to be familiar with it, to use it, also to train where possible some of our workers or some of our staff that are closer to the communities. We also realized the human connections relationships that became increasingly important, because a number of our staff called us back not to discuss issues of the work, but also just to discuss how they were managing within their families, how they are coping within the situation. But the realization came to us that this is very important, to remain connected, to remain in these relationships. Is not enough just to keep it because of the work, but also to keep it because of ourselves, because of the nature of us as human beings. We need to remain connected. We also realized that we could embrace failure as an option without fear, because the situation we're facing, us and the communities where we work, was the same. So that situation enabled us to understand that failure is an option, but is not in the end to our work. Even if we fail, there is a way to have a continuity. But we received a lot of support from the national government, because it gave us permits to enable our cars work for the emergencies. The local governments, because they asked us to be embedded within their systems and be able to work to support. The communities, because we remained there with some of our staff. And this came from the fact that our reputation in the past was always good with them. And we said to ourselves, reflecting over this, that reputation of good work really matters in these kind of circumstances. People trust you and they're able to call upon you, and you're able to understand what are the real needs, and you're able to follow those needs. So in conclusion, And I saw Gianpaolo mention that, Laura mentioned about it. For sure, the COVID exposed the fact that, one, we are all the same. We are all the same in the sense that what was happening to us as the staff in AFSI was the same thing happening to the communities. When the communities explained to us what they are going through, we understood it better. But we also understood that there are many things. For example, the first casualty of COVID in Uganda was not COVID related. It was the fact that there were other social services that had been hindered. And it also gave us the realization that we need to prepare communities in future more with an equitable eye, because if they are not, anything, whether it's health, whether it comes from any other angle, can affect them equally. So this also managed to give us that understanding that the communities are not the same. The rural communities and the urban communities experienced this pandemic in a different way. Even in the rural communities, the ones near the urban centers experience it way. The children experience it differently. We made a survey recently to try to understand, once the school started opening, how many children will be able to return to school. And we realized that 6,000 of our girls in one of the districts had got pregnant. So we started following them up in order to be able to address their needs, because that was now, those are individual needs, and each one of those girls needs a certain support in order to be able to continue their life after this what has happened. So I just want to stop there, and thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, John and Paulo. That was really interesting, and there's so much here that we could talk about. But let me, before I open to some questions from the audience, Laura, I think we were hearing. Sorry, you in your intervention, you emphasized a little bit more the role of the government and systems, right? I think we saw some examples from John and Gianpaolo about how the NGOs have helped in the crisis and help kind of fill the gap. What other comments might you have for us about, what role you see the nonprofit organizations like AFSI having in the initial phase of mitigating immediate impact of COVID and maybe also into the long term?
Well, I think that, the NGOs like AFSI has an enormous role to play. And unfortunately, or fortunately for the people that benefit from that, are forced to do that. And it becomes very often a good alibi for government. I'm old school in a sense that I think that government has the main responsibility of doing certain things for the people that they serve, and that civil society organizations shouldn't really fill that gap. But the reality is that we have seen that that has all been the case. I mean, even in a country as rich as the United States, you have seen a lot of community solidarity, stepping in and filling voids. So there is a very important role that they play. I am always afraid that this stepping into action, which is the vocation of the non-for-profit sector, when it becomes so urgent and so intensive, divert them from another very important responsibility, which is to be, to keep governments on their toes in terms of, doing things right for their people. The important role of advocacy that they have to be really the hinge between society at large and those who are chosen to represent society, and make sure that the policies and programs and that the use of public resources happens in accordance to what are the needs of the people. And if civil society don't do that, then if NGOs don't do that, then nobody else does it. And that comes really, unfortunately, very often at detriment of the poor, who have no advocate, who have no voice. They are the voice of the voiceless, and in each and every society. And I think that, if the situation, the context, as it has been the case now with COVID, pushing them into action, they immediately respond to that because that is in their DNA. They see need and they step in. They have to intervene and they have to improve. And that's great. Because it brings a lot of good benefit. I think that the things that John was describing in his very interesting presentation, were very clear. The people who were there benefiting from the work of ADSFI, they were absolutely happy about that. But at the same time, there is much more bigger picture type of things that I feel civil society organizations have to do and have to play. And I am always concerned that if they don't do it, the other kind of things, then nobody else does it.
Yeah, so just so that you know, and everyone knows, yes, we are talking a lot about this question of how can we as an organization be a more proactive voice of the voiceless and advocate on behalf. And some of those avenues are becoming more clear to us. Let me put that same question to Gianpaolo and John. We also have another question that came from Barbara Jackson from Trickle Up. She would like to know if you could speak more about how AFSI in Uganda will work differently in the future. And John, you might also address the question about the vaccine, whether the vaccine rollout is imminent, and how, and what kind of timeline and what impact do you think that will have? So let's see, why don't we go to John and then to Gianpaolo? John, are you with us?
Yes. Sorry. You want me to go first?
If you're ready, yes.
Okay. Well, the vaccine, they just received the first consignment of the vaccine in Uganda, but Ugandans are still remembering the issue of when there was a food distribution during the lockdown. A lot of this goes, it's never clear, and I think the logistical implication of it sometimes the impact on what the quality of what in the end happens. Now, they have said the vaccines will first go to the healthy workers and those people who are at risk. And also at the second instance, it will mainly go to the people above the age of 60. That is the plan. But in terms of rolling it out, it becomes a little bit problematic, because one of the things that they are doing at the moment, they say it will only be carried out in the government facilities. And for people who are familiar with the Ugandan structure, almost more than close to 50% of the health services in Uganda are carried out by the private sector, or not for profit, or even just private health centers. So that already gives us a kind of thinking that how will this be done equitably? How will it be? How will people access? Of course, it is still too early for us to judge and comment on it. We still need to think and see how this is going to happen. We know that also among the emergency within the camps, UNHCR is trying to look at alternative methods of trying to have the vaccines for some of the frontline staff. But again, this also comes within the same environment of how this whole national distribution process is going to happen. So we're hopeful that the vaccines will come, because we've seen that the vaccines have been, some of them are already here, but we don't know at what rate they will be distributed. We don't know the access, whether these things will reach also the last mile, people within the rural areas. We don't know that. But if we go by the food distribution, then it means that probably there will have to be additional interventions to be able to close a lot of gaps.
No, sorry, only a comment about what Laura said about the role of the civil society. Is only a comment about the Italian situation. I think it's very interesting. Now, what it was evident during this crisis is that, according to me, is my personal reflection, is that in Italy the state has failed, because they were not able to do nothing, not the tests, not the case, now not the vaccine. And I think also for this new next generation wave program, that is a recovery plan that is to be placed the next month with the European funds. I think that especially in the social activities, education in this sector, without the active role of the civil society organization, I think it is impossible to reach the minimum objective of the plan, because the state is not able, especially in the execution of the activities. It's clear that the state has to define the rules, the objective, together with the civil society, but in execution, without the role of the civil society, is, according to me, it will be possible to reach only the minimum objective of the plan, because and this in Italy is because of the bureaucracy, of the lot of reasons, but this is evident. This is the first point. Another thing that I want to add before to close is that I want to repeat what also John said before, that for sure another lesson we learned during this crisis is a sort of a benefit of this year, a new awareness about the solidarity, because we all everywhere in the world, we all are facing the same emergency, and this creates a new feeling about the concept of north and south of the world. We are all in the same context. We are sharing the same feeling of danger, and this should become a push factor to see at development cooperation with a new gaze, and the importance of development cooperation, the importance, the role of development cooperation. And I think that could be the beginning of an evolution from solidarity to a new sustainable fraternity. This is a point, according to me, is very important.
Those are beautiful, beautiful concepts, Gianpaolo. Thanks. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. Colin wanted to ask a question. So let me take Colin's question. And if there's one more question out there or comment, please just let me know, and then we can sneak one more in before we come to our conclusion. Over to you, Colin.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Yeah, I'm Colin Murphy, also with ABSA USA. Just to tie this discussion back a little bit to the event that inspired it at the New York Encounter, there was a discussion there about how community was meant to be this sort of third pillar to sort of balance against the political and the economic pillars, and that it was necessary to have a strong sense of community to make everything work well together. And I guess my question is for John or Gianpaolo, either one. I wonder if in ABSI's experience, if we've ever had the experience of approaching either a government or local organization or even an individual potential beneficiary who was skeptical of this idea, received pushback on this idea of the strength of community and the strength that we could offer. And then maybe if we noticed or experienced a change in their perception of the role of community through our work with them, if we might have a good experience or example of that to share.
John, please, probably you are the best.
I can just say something on this. I don't know if you say if the perception of the community and how they saw our interventions or what we do, but I said, I've always told my colleagues that one of the, for me, surprising things about this pandemic is how it brought us together and how it allowed us to remain connected and yet distanced by distance. I mean, because we had to be locked down, we had to be quarantined, we had all those kind of stuff. But this was the same thing that happened to us with also the communities. We started to share whatever we thought was useful for us. we shared with them. We realized, for example, we could afford masks, maybe we can buy, but we couldn't afford to buy masks for all of them. In fact, initially, the US government in one of our fundings here did not accept the use of their resources to be able to buy the personal protective equipment. So what did we do? Talking to these communities, they said, oh, well, if you can give us some of the materials, we are able to make these masks for ourselves. But of course, they needed a training. So we started to link with the communities in quite a different way, in which they don't simply expect us to be givers, but they see us sharing what we have with them and sharing our knowledge and sharing in a manner because we were addressing an issue that affected us equally with them. We are used to saying we are going there to support you on this because for us, probably we have it. But now we are going there to support you because we are faced with the same thing. Maybe we have not addressed it fully, even for ourselves, but we think that this collaboration with you is going to make a difference. And I think we saw that doing that, we were able to reconnect with the communities in a different way. Even with I was talking about the local governments. I remember initially the local governments were not able to meet some of the needs in order to address the needs of the communities due to the pandemic. In fact, one of the problems was that while the pandemic was of a healthy nature, the needs that came out very prominently were not of health nature, because some of them were just needs because they are locked down and they can't move anywhere. Some of them were needs because the economic situation is not good enough for them to address the health needs, which were completely different. But what happened is that the local governments in the areas where we work wrote to the central government asking them to give us movement passes, because they said if AFSI gets movement passes, we can be able to work together and we find solutions for some of those things, because there were no resources coming from the central government, despite all the promises that were there. But this happens because anyway, the resources are limited in the first place. But I think the other aspect I also just want to say, because I mentioned the fact that we could not use some of the resources because of the restrictions of these resources. I think it is important also for us as an organization. I think we have some resources that are unrestricted that come from donors that see things the way we see them and they don't put a lot of restrictions on these resources. And those elements give us flexibility to really address the real situation without fear of the impediments of the regulations associated with these resources. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So as we wrap up here, I mean, there's obviously much more we could speak about, but I'm already, really kind of reassured and reinvigorated by hearing, what John and Gianpaolo and Laura have shared with us. I think we see as an organization this emphasis on the person that Gianpaolo was mentioning. It's so clearly not just about how we look at the beneficiaries, but in communities, but also how we look at ourselves and our role, and our, the concept of staff care, of course, has become much more important in these times because, we can't do this work without staff who are committed and who are in good health. We also can't do this kind of work without donors and supporters and foundations and others who see what we do and value it and then also support it. So there's a big task in front of us. I think we see, and I think you've appreciated all of the work that AFSI and all the other NGOs out there have been doing over this past year. It's been a tiring year as well, because all of this contingency planning and readjusting activities and everything and looking for new resources has been exhausting. But it's also kind of reinvigorated us and our kind of clarity about our role. I just want to conclude, if you permit me, with just one quotation from Pope Francis, who I think we can all, most if not all of us can agree is an inspiration in helping us to look at the challenge of COVID, not only as a challenge, but also as an opportunity. So in his most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis suggests to us that each day offers us a new opportunity, a new possibility. We should not expect everything from those who govern us, for that would be childish. We have the space that we need for co-responsibility in creating and putting into place new processes and changes. Let us take an active part in renewing and supporting our troubled societies. Today, we have a great opportunity to express our innate sense of fraternity, to be good Samaritans who bear the pain of other people's troubles, rather than fomenting greater hatred and resentment. Difficulties that seem overwhelming are opportunities for growth, not excuses for glum resignation that can lead only to acquiescence. Yet let us not do this alone as individuals. The Samaritan discovered an innkeeper who would care for the man. We too are called to unite as a family that is stronger than the sum of small individual members. So with that hopeful note, we have a big task ahead of us, but we're so grateful for all of you to count all of you as friends and supporters. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to, most of you know me, feel free to reach out to us directly if you want to continue the conversation in some way. But thank you most of all to our panelists and for joining us, giving us your time and preparing. Good luck with all of your work, and let's stay in touch. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Ciao. Ciao. Thank you very much.
Bye, Jackie. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Ciao, Laura. Ciao.